Let's go! Who will be the next head coach at LSU? Right now, I want you to give me your number one candidate because obviously we have a lot of names to sort through. And on today's video, we're going to go through this in chapters, names that I don't like. And then, of course, at the end, I'll give you my top three candidates. So obviously starting off right here are three names I would stay away from: Urban Meyer, Bill O'Brien, John Gruden. Let's start with Urban Meyer. We did a full video as to why he shouldn't be the next head coach at LSU because I get that name a lot. Off the field is just a mess. We don't know what is even going through Urban Meyer's mind, and you always have to worry about him just quitting, not leaving for another job, but just quitting altogether. So if you want to watch that video, I'll link it down below. And now we get to the not happening portion of today's video, and these next 10 or so names are going to be names connected, but I just don't think is going to happen. Starting off here with the NFL offensive coordinators, obviously these first two names are names that have been more heavily connected to the LSU job, two names that have strong Louisiana ties. I just don't see either one of these guys leaving the NFL knowing they are knocking on the door for NFL head coaching jobs. Legit, both of these guys were interviewed for NFL head coaching jobs last year. So, quite simply put, any NFL offensive coordinator is not going to be the next head coach at LSU. I think Scott Woodward, knowing his history in college athletics, wants to hire a college coach. So, going ahead and mark off your list any NFL offensive coordinator. I also think you need to do the same with retired legends. Bob Stoops is never going to coach at a non-Oklahoma school. Just by watching him on broadcasts and him doing broadcasting, it seems as if he really enjoys doing it. I just don't see him becoming unretired, even though LSU would be a job that would interest him. And Chris Peterson, I could see this happening, knowing him and Scott Woodward are really tight because Woodward was the one who hired him at Washington. So of these two names, I think Chris Peterson is the more likely candidate. And then we'll spend a little bit more time on these five names right here under the not happening category. And as you can see, all five of these names are involved in the college football playoff race outside of course, Dabo Swinney. I do think every non-Kirby and Saban coach is going to be questioned. I mean, I saw Bruce Feldman bringing this up in his report that Dabo Swinney, this could, even though it's a distant possibility, happen. And Dabo's one of the best college football coaches ever, just by the Clemson tenure alone. I just don't see it happening. And it's kind of the same thing with a guy like Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State, where the program is them. Legit, it is all about them. They are the reason why their programs are where they are today, and it's just hard for a coach to leave a situation where they can fully be themselves and have the autonomy that both of those guys have at where they are right now. So I just don't think Dabo or Gundy, even though Gundy's name isn't listed here, is going to happen. Moving on to Luke Fickell. Some of you have your sources and have told me that Luke Fickell is in no way going to take this LSU job, obviously with this Midwest ties, and the list goes on and on. I'm sorry, when you go from Cincinnati to LSU, you listen. So I'm not crossing Luke Fickell off this list because it would make a lot of sense for him to leave a school like Cincinnati and go to a school like LSU where your resources are going to be so much better. So it's crazy talk to think that Luke Fickell would not think about taking the LSU job. It honestly is just wild to me. And then we get to Mario Cristobal. Look at what Oregon has done in recruiting. Look at what Cristobal has done in recruiting. Look at the resources Oregon has at their disposal. We don't know whoever the next coach is going to be at USC is going to actually turn that program into being something relevant. Oregon has a pretty clear path to Pac-12 dominance over the next decade. And I think Mario Cristobal understands that, and Oregon is an elite job with elite resources, with deep pockets. Heck, they have outcasts going to all their games. It's a cool happening place right now. And I don't think Mario Cristobal would be as hungry to get back into the SEC and have to play Saban each and every year when Mario Cristobal himself is not a schematic genius by any stretch of the imagination. All right, we get to the next tier here, and these are 4 names that I could see being the next head coach at LSU. And let's start with by far the juiciest name on this list, which is Jimbo Fisher. Okay? Now, Jimbo is at Texas A&M, and he is receiving an absolutely insane salary. And I know a lot of Texas A&M fans will send me the clip of Jimbo Fisher saying he loves it at Texas A&M. So what? You should always take a coach at his word, really? No, Jimbo will think about it, right? If there is mutual interest. Obviously, Jimbo Fisher's coached at LSU before. Obviously, Jimbo Fisher owes Scott Woodward a lot with getting him to Texas A&M and getting him the salary that he's got today. There will be interest. I guarantee you it has crossed Jimbo Fisher's mind coming back to LSU and rejoining an athletic director he's obviously really close to. I do not think it will happen. Jimbo was initially listed with the other names you just saw because he's probably more like the other names on this list than these other 3 names, and that Texas A&M is recruiting at a high level. Texas A&M did get close to a college football playoff. Texas A&M could be a household Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama, LSU type of job and type of program. Jimbo's got all of those capabilities. Moving on here to Hugh Freeze, who obviously is a bright offensive mind, did come to LSU, to the state of Louisiana and took an L from ULM with obviously the best quarterback draft prospect in this cycle. And I'm not as on fire with Hugh Freeze as a lot of you are, but he did win big at Ole Miss. He is an offensive innovator, but still not as on fire about it. Obviously, there are off-the-field baggage things you have to worry about. Baton Rouge is Cougar Central, and that is something you have to worry about with Hugh Freeze, knowing how things went down at Ole Miss. So obviously, Hugh Freeze, I think, would win big at LSU. I'm not as on fire about it as these next 2 names. Alrighty, these top 2 names are very fascinating. Billy Napier and Mel Tucker. Now, these are the top 2 names of this tier. We'll get to my personal top 3 in just a second. But obviously, Billy Napier is a name that a lot of you are familiar with. We have so many viewers in Lafayette, and so many of you know how talented of a coach he is. He's won big there. And I do feel there is a piece of him that probably thinks he's maximized what he could potentially do at UL. And this is a name that obviously has been tied into other SEC jobs in the past. A Sabanite, there's so many boxes Billy Napier checks, and you don't have to break the bank to get him to LSU either. So I do like Billy Napier a lot. I do think he can win big at LSU. And then we get to Mel Tucker, who, by the way, is the Vegas favorite for this job. Not only that, he is a name that is most closely associated with the LSU job. Bruce Feldman, who is obviously extremely tied into LSU, and Ed Orgeron, says Mel Tucker is a name that is being seriously considered. And then you have local media, whether that be Mike Detillier, whether that be Lon Phillips Sullivan, or Blake at Are You Serious Sports, and I'm on a show tonight. So, there's some national and local media that is reporting that Mel Tucker is being seriously considered by LSU. Now, we don't know a whole lot about how Mel feels about that job, but we do know this is a man who's well-traveled, whether it be in the NFL, whether it be obviously with Georgia and Alabama, and now at Colorado, and now at Michigan State. So yeah, this is a man who is extremely talented. I was reading up on his recruiting staff, and the clarity he has for a program and what type of player he wants is really, really impressive. And what he's doing this year in Michigan State is also really impressive. This guy destroyed the transfer portal, probably better than anyone else in college football, and he's made Michigan State a real force this year. So now we get to my top 3 candidates. My number 3 candidate is Dave Aranda. I've shared plenty of times how much I love Dave Aranda. A defensive mastermind, a schematic mastermind, a guy that even Bill Belichick has taken concepts from. He is an elite defensive coach, and he was not only elite during his tenure at LSU, it is a myth that the 2019 LSU defense wasn't great. Outside of true road games, the LSU defense was elite, okay? Not good, not great, elite under Dave Aranda. They had a bad game versus Ole Miss, so what? They had a really bad half versus Texas, so what? It was the second game of the year. It was extremely hot, and this was only the second game where, as a defensive play caller, he had to call alongside a high-powered offense, which is different. So, look, Dave Aranda had some hiccups in 2019, but for the most part, his tenure as the LSU defensive coordinator was one of the most dominant tenures of any coordinator in LSU history. And obviously, if Dave Aranda came to LSU, I would also think Jeff Grimes would come back to LSU. There are some guys on Dave Aranda's staff that are heavily tied to the LSU program anyway. So I do think some staffers would come along for the ride, and I do think Dave Aranda can win a national championship at LSU. I really do. So as a head coach. So I really do like the idea of bringing Dave Aranda back, because already year 2 at Baylor with a quarterback and Jerry Bohanna, who's decent, but still Baylor's looked really impressive this season. So I would not mind Dave Aranda being the next head coach at LSU. But these last 2 names are probably by far my favorite 2 names for this next head coaching job. Number 2 is James Franklin. Look, what he did at Vanderbilt was probably the most underrated yet legendary coaching job you'll ever see. Winning 9 games at Vanderbilt twice. At Vanderbilt, I don't care who they had at quarterback. I don't care what breaks they had along the way. Winning 9 games at Vanderbilt is as impressive as any coach at LSU, Florida, or Alabama winning a national championship. That's how hard it is to win 9 games at Vanderbilt, and James Franklin did it twice. And he's done a really solid job overall at Penn State, which is a job that people view as probably better than it actually is. Look, James Franklin, obviously Pennsylvania native. He likes where he is. I totally get it, but I also think there's a piece of him that is maxed out at where he is at Penn State. So I like James Franklin a lot. It would be really cool to see him as the next head coach, but I do think he is probably leaning towards taking the job at USC more so than LSU. I could see him leave Penn State to go for either one of these jobs. I can also see him easily staying at Penn State as well. I am high on the James Franklin train. Now, as far as him being an offensive mastermind, it's not as if he's some schematic genius. But overall, as far as running a program is concerned, we know James Franklin is elite. And he's won at places that is not easy to win. And he's just a big-time head coach. There's no other way around it. I think he's the most underrated head coach in the country, and I would love to see James Franklin as the next head coach at LSU. The name that a lot of people are clamoring for LSU to go get, and it is Lane Kiffin. As far as off the field, yes, you can think Lane Kiffin is immature at times, but he's going to run a clean program. Well, clean for college football standards. Now, as far as being a coach is concerned, Lane Kiffin is the best play caller in the SEC, not named Dan Mullen. I still think Dan Mullen's number 1, but Kiffin or Mullen is 1 and 2, right? He's really good. I like what he's done at Ole Miss. Obviously, a lot of it has to do to Matt Corral being a very good quarterback, so you do begin to question that. But let's be honest, Lane Kiffin, when he was at Alabama, he was the best offensive coordinator. Obviously, he's won at Florida Atlantic. That's not really all that impressive. But, it's true that he almost took the offensive coordinator job at LSU under Ed Orgeron. And I do think there's a piece of him that wants to win a national championship. And he knows he can't accomplish that at Ole Miss because he'll never recruit to the level you need to win a national championship at Ole Miss. So I do think Lane Kiffin will take the LSU job, and I do think he will be the next head coach of the LSU Tigers. No inside information. It's just me dreaming and hoping that my number one candidate is hired to be the next head coach at LSU. Now, there are some things you have to worry about with Lane Kiffin, the Twitter stuff, and, once again, the maturity stuff. I totally get it. Some people still think he is not head coach material, just a really, really, really talented offensive play caller, and you might be right about that. Still, Lane Kiffin is the number one candidate for this job. And now here's your opportunity to tell me who you think the number one candidate will be for LSU. It's going to be so hard to replace Ed Orgeron, especially considering how big of a deal the 2019 season was. But I do think there are plenty of coaches out there who can win national championships at LSU. And there are other outside factors that will play a role in this coaching search, such as a Title IX background search. A guy like James Franklin does have Title IX issues in his past. Race is going to be a factor. Whether or not you like it, it will be a factor. It will be thought of when the decision makers at LSU actually make the next decision, whether or not the coach is black or white, Hispanic, whatever. I do think that will be a part of this decision-making process. And on tomorrow night's live stream, I'm going to share with some thoughts that I've heard as far as race is concerned when it comes to hiring practices around the country. Because as many of you know, in college football, it is an overwhelmingly white head coach sport, and it's pretty much at the NFL level as well. So we'll talk about that tomorrow, and I feel as if that is better discussed in a live stream format. So hope you stay tuned for that. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'm about to be on Are You Serious Sports here in just a second, so make sure you check that out as well. Support my guy Blake, and it is Power Hour LSU. Boom! Oh, we're doing steak tonight, Liz.